Close your eyes for a second and step back with me. It's a summer morning in 1954, and you've just pulled open a heavy barn door on a hinge that groans like an old man rising from a chair. That smell hits you all at once: sweet Timothy hay, warm animal machine oil, and something green and earthy underneath it all. Dust hangs in the shafts of light coming through the cracks in the boards. The barn cat watches you from a beam. Somewhere a cow shifts her weight, and the whole building seems to breathe. Here's the thing most folks don't stop to think about. That old barn wasn't just a building where you kept animals and hay. It was the beating heart of the whole farm. A workshop, a nursery, a pantry, a church of sweat and season, and nearly everything that lived inside it back then has quietly vanished from the world. Some of it went to the scrap heap, some of it went to antique malls, and some of it just faded out of memory entirely. So the question I want you to hold on to is this: how many of these 30 things do you still remember? Because by the end, I think you'll be surprised how much of that old barn is still standing inside you. Let's start with the milk stool. Just 3 legs and a worn wooden seat, polished smooth by years of overalls. You'd tuck it against a cow's flank before dawn, lean your forehead into her warm side, and the milk would come down in that steady tin pail rhythm. Zing, zing, zing. My grandfather could fall half asleep on his and never miss a stroke. That little stool meant something. It meant you showed up, twice a day, every day, no matter the weather or how you felt. Hanging near the door, you'd always find the kerosene lantern, its glass chimney black with soot at the top. You'd light it before sunup, and its little flame threw shadows that danced across the stalls like living things. There's a particular smell to a kerosene lantern warming up that no electric bulb ever gave you. Kids were warned never to swing it near the hay, and every farm family knew a story about a barn that burned because somebody forgot. Then there was the hay hook, a wicked-looking curve of steel with a wooden handle worn to the shape of a man's grip. You'd sink it into a bale and swing your whole body to move it. My uncle had a scar across his palm from one, and he wore it like a badge. That hook was honest work, made metal, no button to push, just muscle and leverage, and the ache in your shoulders come nightfall. Up in the loft, you'd find the hay trolley, that long iron track running the length of the peak with a carrier that rode it. A team of horses on a rope outside would haul a whole forkful of loose hay up, and it would ride that track and drop right where you wanted it. Watching that thing work as a boy felt like watching magic. Most of those tracks are still up there, rusted solid, in barns all across this country. Ghosts of a job nobody does that way anymore. Nearly every barn had a grindstone, a big round wheel of gritty stone you turned with a foot pedal or a hand crank. You'd hold a dull axe or a scythe blade against it, and the sparks would fly while water dripped to keep it cool. Number 4. Saturdays meant sharpening day, and the sound of that stone singing against steel meant somebody was getting ready for real work. A sharp blade was a matter of pride, and a dull one was a sign of a lazy man. You'd never find a barn without a pitchfork or two leaning in the corner, real ones, hand-forged, with tines worn shiny and handles bent slightly to the shape of the man who used them. Mucking a stall on a cold morning, your breath fogging, that fork was an extension of your arm. Every kid learned young that you never ever left one lying, tines up in the straw. Tucked in the rafters or nailed to a post, you'd see the barn swallow's mud nests, and I'll count those too, because a barn without swallows felt wrong. They'd dive and swoop through the open doors, catching flies, and their chatter was the soundtrack of chore time. Farmers left them be on purpose. Those birds were free pest control, and there was an old superstition that a barn with swallows would never burn. By the big door hung the horse collar and harness, heavy leather stiff with sweat and neatsfoot oil. The smell of that leather is something I can still call up in an instant. Before the tractor took over, that harness was the difference between a plowed field and a hungry winter. My grandfather kept his oiled and hung just so, long after the horses were gone, because he couldn't bring himself to let it go. Every self-respecting barn had a cream separator, a hand-cranked machine with a stack of shining discs inside. You'd pour in the warm milk and crank until your arm burned, and out one spout came cream and out the other came skim. The whir of that separator meant butter and money both. Farm wives guarded theirs and cleaned every disc by hand, because a dirty separator meant sour cream and a wasted week. There was almost always a corn sheller bolted to a bench. You'd feed an ear in one side, turn the crank, and the kernels would rattle down into a bucket while the naked cob shot out the other end. Kids fought over who got to crank it. It was the kind of chore that felt like play, and the pile of cobs went to the stove or the hogs, because on a farm, nothing got thrown away. Hanging on a nail, you'd find the egg basket, wire or woven splint, worn soft where 100 hands had carried it. Gathering eggs was a child's job, reaching under warm hens who'd peck if you weren't quick. Bringing that basket in full felt like bringing in treasure, and the first egg of a young pullet was cause for a small celebration. Nearly every barn kept a set of milk cans, tall, silvery cylinders that clanked when you moved them and rang like bells when they were empty. You'd haul the full ones to the road for the milk truck, and their weight taught you something about a full day's yield. The rattle of those cans on a wagon bed is a sound that's simply gone from the American morning. There was the block and tackle, a system of pulleys and rope hung from a beam for lifting an engine or a sick calf or a side of beef. It let one man do the work of four, and every farmer understood the quiet genius of it. My father could rig one in his sleep, and he taught me knots I still tie today without thinking. Somewhere on the wall hung the horseshoes, both for luck over the door, open end up so the luck wouldn't run out, and spares for the animals. The blacksmith's visit was an event, the ring of his hammer and the hiss of hot iron in water. Even after the horses left, those shoes stayed nailed up, a little charm against hard times. Most barns had a tack room, a small closed space smelling of leather and liniment, where the good saddles and bridles hung on wooden pegs. It was a warm, close, private place, and a boy could hide there and dream. Everything in it was cared for like it mattered, because it did. Worn tack could throw a rider or lame a horse. You'd find bushel baskets stacked everywhere, split-wood baskets that held apples, potatoes, corn, whatever the season gave. They were the measuring cups of the whole farm. You thought in bushels, you sold in bushels. A good harvest meant baskets stacked to the rafters and a feeling in your chest like you'd beaten the odds one more year. There was the scythe and its cousin the cradle, long curved blades on wooden snaths for cutting hay and grain by hand before machines. Swinging one all day built a rhythm and a set of shoulders you don't see anymore. Old-timers would tell you a man's worth could be measured by how straight his windrow lay behind him. Nailed up somewhere you'd see the fly strips, those sticky curls of paper hung from the ceiling, black with the summer's catch. Not pretty, but in a barn full of animals in August, a small mercy. Every farm kid remembers walking face first into one at least once and never forgetting it. Every barn had its rat terrier or barn cats, working animals that earned their keep in mice. They weren't pets exactly, they were staff. But a good mouser got the cream of the milking, and a mama cat with a litter in the hay was a soft spot in a hard-working place. There was the water trough and hand pump, cast iron with a long handle you worked until the water came gushing cold and clean. You'd prime it on a frosty morning and your hands would go numb, but that water tasted like the earth itself. The clank of that pump handle called the animals, as sure as any bell. Most barns kept a whetstone tucked in a coat pocket or a windowsill, a small oval stone for touching up a knife or a sickle in the field. A farmer without one felt naked. There was a right way to hold a blade to it, taught father to son, and the whetstone smell is one I'd know anywhere. You'd find the manure spreader parked in the alley or just outside, a wagon with beaters on the back that flung the good stuff across the fields. Not glamorous, but that spreader was why the corn came up tall. Farmers understood something we've half forgotten, that waste feeds the next crop, and nothing is really garbage on a farm. There was the seed corn hanging to dry, ears of your best, corn braided by their husks, and strung from the rafters for next year's planting. You saved your own seed then, chose it by hand, and it tied one season to the next like a promise. Store-bought hybrid seed changed all that, and those braided ears vanished from the beams. Nearly every barn had a rope swing, a length of hay rope knotted at the bottom, hung from the highest beam over the soft loft hay. That was the reward after chores, swinging out over the mow and letting go into a pile of hay. Half the childhoods in rural America happened on that rope, and the laughter soaked into those old boards. You'd see the wooden butter churn, a tall crock with a plunger you worked up and down until your arms gave out, and the butter finally came. It took 40 minutes of steady work and a strong back. When it broke and the butter formed, the whole family cheered, because that was real food made with your own two hands. There was the ox yoke or singletree, wooden crossbars that hitched animals to a plow or a wagon. Even in the 50s, plenty of farms still leaned on animal power for the muddy jobs a tractor couldn't reach. My great-grandfather's yoke hung on the wall like a piece of art, smoothed by generations of shoulders. Somewhere near the workbench hung the coil of baling wire, that endless roll of soft steel that fixed absolutely everything. Broken gate, busted harness, sagging fence, baling wire held rural America together. Baling wire and prayer, my grandmother used to say, and she wasn't entirely joking. And you'd always find the calving chains and a warm corner set aside for a birthing cow or a weak newborn lamb brought in from the cold and rubbed dry with straw. Those late nights in the barn, lantern low, waiting on new life, are burned into every old farmer's memory. Watching a calf take its first wobbling steps in the straw taught a child more about life and death than any book ever could. So there they are, 30 things that filled those old barns and then slipped away one by one as the tractors and the milk plants and the hardware stores changed everything. But here's what I want you to carry with you. Those weren't just tools and objects. They were the language of a way of life built on your own two hands, your neighbor's help, and the turning of the seasons. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away that could be mended, and a family standing in a warm barn on a cold morning knew, deep in their bones, that they could take care of themselves. That kind of quiet pride doesn't come from a store. It comes from a life like that one. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these do you remember? Maybe you swung on that rope, or cranked that separator, or gathered eggs in a wire basket as the sun came up. Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. And if this brought back a memory you'd nearly forgotten, do an old barn a favor and share it with somebody who'd remember it too.